Ethiopia, the Ark, Zion, and its prophetic role in apocalyptic prophecy. Ethiopia, an ancient country with a rich and mysterious culture, has been mentioned in many biblical passages as a symbol of salvation and the restoration of the nations in God's divine plan. In prophecy, Ethiopia is not only a country but also carries an important role in the restoration of Israel and apocalyptic prophecies. The Ark, with its sacredness, has become an indispensable symbol in the connection between Ethiopia and the holiness of Zion. The presence of the Ark in Ethiopia is a sign of the sacred connection between the nations and God's promise of the ultimate restoration of Jerusalem. Zion, the place God chose as the center of the prophecies, will be the place where all nations, including Ethiopia, will gather in worship and glory to Him. The lessons of Ethiopia, the Ark, and Zion remind us of God's faithfulness to His promises and the extension of salvation to all nations at the last day. Number 1. Ethiopia, land of prophecy and salvation. Ethiopia, known in the Bible as Cush, is not only an ancient country but also plays an important role in apocalyptic prophecies. From its deep connections to human history to its role in end-time events, Ethiopia appears repeatedly in the Bible as a symbol of faith, salvation, and God's protection. The story of Ethiopia, with its special connection to the Ark of the Covenant, Zion, and important future events, is a testament to God's intervention in human history. Ethiopia in the Bible. Ethiopia first appears in the Bible through the story in Genesis 2:13, where the region of Cush is described as one of the sources of the rivers of the Garden of Eden. This harks back to the early days of humanity, when Ethiopia was an integral part of the formation and development of civilization. Cush is son of Ham, one of Noah's 3 sons, and this association highlights Ethiopia as a nation that has had a profound influence on human history. Ethiopia's role in apocalyptic prophecies. One of Ethiopia's key connections to apocalyptic prophecies is the passage in Isaiah 18, which speaks of a powerful nation beyond the Cush River that will bring offerings to God in the last days. This may be a direct reference to Ethiopia. Some scholars believe that the country will have a major role in the end times, related to the return of Christ. Ethiopia also appears in other prophecies such as Ezekiel 38, where the country is said to be involved in major events during the end times. The fact that Ethiopia appears repeatedly in these prophecies suggests the important role the country will play in the fulfillment of God's plan. The Ark of the Covenant and Ethiopia's role. One of the most prominent elements in the story of Ethiopia is the country's role in protecting the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object of the Israelites. According to legend, the Ark of the Covenant was brought from Jerusalem to Ethiopia by Menelik I, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Menelik I is said to have brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia in the 10th century BC and kept it in the Church of St. Mary of Zion in Aksum, one of Ethiopia's holiest sites. The importance of Ethiopia's protection of the Ark of the Covenant becomes even clearer when looking at the prophecies in Revelation 11:19, which speak of the appearance of the Ark of the Covenant in the last days as a sign of redemption and divine intervention. If Ethiopia does indeed hold the Ark of the Covenant, its reappearance would be a significant event, signaling the fulfillment of prophecies about the end of the world and the salvation of mankind. Ethiopia and the lineage of Solomon. Ethiopia is also prominent in the Bible, as it is traditionally believed to be the lineage of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. According to Kings 10, the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon, bearing gifts, and was greatly impressed by his wisdom and wealth. According to tradition, this visit led to a romantic relationship between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, which resulted in the birth of Menelik I of the Solomonic dynasty in Ethiopia. This is especially important in the context of messianic prophecies. The Bible, especially Matthew 1, states that the Messiah would come from the lineage of King David. Since Menelik I was the son of King Solomon, if his lineage were related to the Messiah, Ethiopia would have a special role in fulfilling God's plan of salvation. Ethiopia and the lost tribes of Israel. Another important element in the story of Ethiopia is its relationship to the lost tribes of Israel. The Beta Israel community, or Ethiopian Jews, are believed to be descendants of the tribe of Dan, one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. This community has maintained its faith and traditions for centuries, despite being isolated from the rest of the Jewish world. The story of Beta Israel's return to Israel during the Solomonic campaign in the late 20th century is a significant event, seen as a fulfillment of the prophecy in Ezekiel 37:19-24, which speaks of the regathering of the tribes of Israel in the last days. This further highlights the deep connection between Ethiopia and Israel in God's plan of salvation. Libela and the Sierra's relationship to Zion. Libela, Ethiopia's famous religious site, is one of the country's most sacred sites. Its monolithic churches are said to be a model of the New Jerusalem, reflecting the biblical image of Zion. With this connection, Liberia has become an important pilgrimage site and a testament to the far-reaching religious influence of Ethiopia throughout history. Ethiopia. Is Zion really in the end times? One of the more controversial views in Ethiopian tradition is the belief that Ethiopia is the true Zion at the end of the world. Psalm 87:4 reads, "I will record Rahab and Babylon among those who acknowledge me, Philistine, Tyre and Cush, and they will say, 'This one was born in Zion.'" Those who hold this belief believe that Ethiopia, with its long history of faith and its role in protecting the Ark of the Covenant, could be the true religious center at the end of the world, instead of Jerusalem. This not only highlights the important role of Ethiopia in the prophecies, but also shows the fact that God can choose seemingly unrelated places to fulfill His plan of salvation. And if Ethiopia is indeed Zion, this would have profound implications for the conversion and rebirth of the people, part of God's grand plan for the world. Ethiopia, with all its historical and prophetic connections, will certainly have an important role to play in the end times. This connection reminds us of God's miraculous intervention in history and how He can use nations and peoples to fulfill final prophecies. The story of Beta Israel being brought to Israel during the Solomonic campaign in the late 20th century is a significant event, seen as a fulfillment of the prophecy in Ezekiel 37:19-24, which speaks of the regathering of the tribes of Israel in the last days. This further highlights the deep connection between Ethiopia and Israel in God's plan of salvation. Libela and the relationship with Zion. Libela, Ethiopia's famous religious site, is one of the country's most sacred sites. The monolithic churches here are said to be models of the New Jerusalem, reflecting the biblical image of Zion. With this association, Liberia has become an important pilgrimage site and a testament to the far-reaching religious influence of Ethiopia throughout history. Ethiopia, the real Zion in the end times? One of the more controversial views in Ethiopian tradition is the belief that Ethiopia is the real Zion in the end times. Psalm 87:4 reads, "I will record Rahab and Babylon among those who acknowledge me, Philistine, Tyre and Cush, and they will say, 'This one was born in Zion.'" Those who hold this belief believe that Ethiopia, with its long history of faith and role in protecting the Ark of the Covenant, could be the true religious center in the end times, instead of Jerusalem. This not only highlights the important role of Ethiopia in the prophecies, but also shows the fact that God can choose seemingly unrelated places to fulfill His plan of salvation. And if Ethiopia is indeed Zion, this would have profound implications for the conversion and rebirth of the people, part of God's grand plan for the world. Ethiopia, with all its historical and prophetic connections, will certainly have an important role in the end times. This connection reminds us of God's miraculous intervention in history and how He can use nations and peoples to fulfill His final prophecies. Number 2. Spiritual legacy. The journey of Elisha and Elijah. Elisha's life and work were not only an inheritance of prophetic power from Elijah, but also brought a profound message about the transmission of faith and the connection between generations of believers in the work of serving God. This legacy is not only the continuation of the work of a prophet, but also the responsibility to maintain and develop God's work in the world. Elisha did not only receive power, but also shouldered a great responsibility to become the one who passed on the faith to the next generation. This required him not only to continue Elijah's work, but also to train successors so that they would continue to bring God's message to the world. Spiritual succession. When Elisha asked God to give him double the power of Elijah, 2 Kings 2:9, he not only wanted to receive power, but also wanted God's work to develop more strongly, to fulfill his mission with growth and influence greater. This is a clear demonstration of the transfer of power between generations, with the sole purpose of the glory of God. Responsibility to pass on the faith. Elisha clearly recognized that his responsibility was not only to continue Elijah's prophetic work, but also to help the next generations understand and accept God's faith. Throughout his journey, he never worked alone. Instead, Elisha built a community of faithful believers who accompanied him in doing God's work. A typical example is when Elisha taught the disciples in 1 Kings 4:38 through 44. Not only did he perform miracles, Elisha also acted as a teacher, guiding the disciples to know and serve God. He not only acted according to the power God gave him, but also passed on the faith through specific actions, helping believers in the community better understand their relationship with God. Community support. The relationship between Elisha and the community of prophets was not just a simple teacher-student relationship, but also a community of mutual support in the work of God. Throughout the stories of Elisha, we see that he never worked alone. His disciples and followers always accompanied him, helping him to perform miraculous works. The support and encouragement from the community is an important factor for the work of God to be completed effectively. This emphasizes that in the work of serving God, no one is called to work alone. Each person needs the support, encouragement, and strength of the community of believers. Just as Elisha received support from his disciples, he himself became an important part of the community. This is a strong message about the necessity of community in serving God. The continuation of generations of believers. Elisha's work was not only to continue Elijah's legacy, but also to prepare the next generation. Elisha did not just train his disciples to continue God's work, but also to help them grow in their faith, teaching them how to live according to God's will. He invested in the next generation, helping them understand that serving God was not just a task, but a lifelong calling. Elisha's legacy was not just miracles or miraculous works, but also lessons in faithfulness, patience, and unwavering faith in doing God's work. Elisha taught his disciples and future generations that faith is not just a word, but a concrete action, a commitment to live according to God's will and serve Him with all your heart. Today's application. The story of Elisha and Elijah is not only a story of the past, but also a profound lesson for us today. Elisha's spiritual legacy reminds us of the importance of passing on the faith to the next generation. Passing on the faith is not only the responsibility of religious leaders, but also of each individual in the community. Each of us needs to live in such a way that our faith can be passed on to younger people, helping them to continue God's work in the future. We need to remember that, like Elisha, each of us has a great responsibility to protect and develop the legacy of faith. When we live in service to God, we not only fulfill our mission, but also help the next generation to stand firm in the faith. This generation will continue and develop God's work, continuing to bring His light to this world. Elisha's spiritual legacy is a reminder to all of us of the importance of continuing the faith, training and preparing future generations, and living lives faithful to God. In every action, word, and decision we make, we need to leave a strong legacy of faith, one that can help future generations continue God's work in love and patience. Number 3. Ethiopia and its final mission in prophecy. Ethiopia, or Cush in the Bible, is a prominent nation in end-time prophecies. Biblical passages such as Isaiah 18 and Ezekiel 38 not only describe Ethiopia's involvement in end-time events, but also suggest the nation's role in worshiping God in the final days of history. Here is an in-depth look at Ethiopia's role in these prophecies and its importance in major end-time events. In Isaiah 18, the prophet Isaiah describes a powerful Ethiopia whose people cross great rivers and send out messengers. Isaiah 18:01 verse 2 reads, "Woe to Cush, where the rivers flow, a mighty and awesome people from ancient times who cross the rivers and send out messengers." This is a prophecy about a nation that will not only be an observer, but will be directly involved in the final events of the world. Ethiopia will not only act as a nation in the context of war, but will also bring offerings to God, showing honor and submission to Him. The importance of Ethiopia in the final wars is further evident in the book of Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 38:5, Ethiopia is mentioned as part of a coalition of nations against Israel in the last days. Along with nations such as Persia, Iran, and other forces from Gog and Magog, Ethiopia will join the fight against God's people, Although this nation will ultimately be defeated through God's intervention, Ethiopia's role cannot be underestimated. Ethiopia's participation in these final wars is only part of God's plan to help fulfill the prophecy of the end times. Ezekiel's prophecy also highlights the great intervention of God in these wars. Although Ethiopia and other nations are allied against Israel, God will intervene to protect His people. This is a powerful message of the invincibility of God, who will ultimately triumph and assert His absolute sovereignty at the end of time. Scholars and researchers have spent much time studying the role of Ethiopia in these prophecies. Some view Ethiopia as not only a nation involved in the war, but also a symbol of restoration and revival in the faith. This is a nation that may have strayed from the faith, but in the last days will return to God and join in glorifying Him. Ethiopia can be seen as a model of nations that have strayed from God, but will be restored and bring glory to Him in the last days. Additionally, Ethiopia's presence in the end times may also be a sign of peace and reconciliation among the peoples of the world. Some scholars believe that Ethiopia's participation is not only related to war, but also part of the process of bringing peace to the nations in the end times. This is an important mission, helping to promote a restoration of faith and love among the peoples. In the context of great events, one of the notable points in the prophecy about Ethiopia is the role of this nation in the return of Christ. In the apocalyptic prophecies, Ethiopia is not only a nation involved in battles, but also a sign of the return of Christ. The presence of Ethiopia in the end times, especially in the wars against Israel, may be a symbol of Christ's return to bring justice and restoration to the world. The messages from the books of Isaiah and Ezekiel are clear about Ethiopia's role in the end times. Isaiah 18 describes an Ethiopian offering to the Lord, while Ezekiel 38-39 describes the nation joining the coalition against Israel in the final war. However, one common thread in all of these prophecies is the intervention of God, who will ultimately triumph and restore justice to the world. Ethiopia in apocalyptic prophecy is not just a nation involved in war, but a symbol of restoration, reconciliation, and glorification of God. Ethiopia's role, whether in the context of war or peace, represents God's work in restoring nations and bringing justice in the last days of the world. As the world faces great challenges, Ethiopia will be part of a great restoration journey, as a testament to God's infinite power and His glory at the end of time. Finally, when we look at Ethiopia's role in end-time prophecy, we see a nation that is not only involved in major events, but also part of God's plan of restoration and rebuilding. Ethiopia can symbolize those nations that have shunned God, but in the end times will return and participate in glorifying God, contributing to the restoration of faith for all humanity. Number 4. Ethiopia and the Ark of the Covenant, a sign of the last days. One of the greatest mysteries and controversies in religious history is that of the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred relic containing the 10 Commandments, the symbol of God's presence among the people of Israel. Since the destruction of the Temple of Solomon in 586 BC, the Ark of the Covenant has been lost, and the search for it has lasted for centuries. However, there is an interesting and powerful religious legend that Ethiopia is the guardian of this sacred relic. Ethiopian tradition and the Ark of the Covenant. According to ancient Ethiopian tradition, especially in the Kebra Nagast, Glory of Kings, the Ark of the Covenant was brought from Jerusalem by Menelik of the Saint when King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This legend holds that Menelik of the Covenant from the temple in Jerusalem to Exum, the ancient city of Ethiopia, where it was kept in the Church of the Saint Mary of Zion. There the Ark of the Covenant was guarded by a single monk, the only one who had access to the relic. This protection has been passed down from monk to monk for centuries. This tradition not only reflects the absolute respect for the Ark of the Covenant, but also affirms Ethiopia as the custodian of a sacred heritage, continuing an important role in God's plan. The Ark of the Covenant is not just a relic, but also a sign of the covenant between God and His people, a symbol of protection and divine presence in the life of the people of Israel. The prophetic role of the Ark of the Covenant in the end times. Revelation 11:19 describes a dramatic scene in the last days, and in the temple of God there was seen the Ark of His covenant. This is not only a significant event, but also a clear sign of the restoration and fulfillment of God's redemptive promise to humanity. If Ethiopia is indeed the custodian of the Ark of the Covenant, the country will become a central element in the end-time apocalyptic events. The Ark of the Covenant is not only a religious relic, but also a powerful prophetic symbol, signaling the beginning of the final deliverance. When the Ark of the Covenant reappears, it will be the time when God fulfills His promises to Israel and all humanity, and reestablishes God's kingdom on earth. The importance of the Ark of the Covenant and Ethiopia in the plan of redemption. Ethiopia, if it is indeed the custodian of the Ark of the Covenant, will play a vital role in the fulfillment of God's final prophecies. The Ark of the Covenant represents God's covenant with His people, and its reappearance is not only a momentous event for Ethiopia, but also has profound implications for all of humanity. In this context, Ethiopia could become a special bridge connecting peoples in the end times, a country with a profound sacred and prophetic heritage, which preserves a legacy that is important not only to the Christian and Jewish traditions, but also to the ultimate redemption of humanity. The presence of the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia could be the key to understanding why this country was chosen to safeguard this sacred relic, which is an integral part of God's plan. This is a big question. Does Ethiopia really hold the Ark of the Covenant? And if so, what role will this country play in the apocalyptic events of the Second Coming? The prophetic question, the reappearance of the Ark of the Covenant in the last days will not only be a sign of redemption, but also a sign that Ethiopia could be at the center of end-time events. It is a nation with a deep spiritual and prophetic heritage that could bring spiritual rebirth to all of humanity. The question is whether the tradition of protecting the Ark of the Covenant is part of God's plan of redemption. And will Ethiopia play a significant role in the fulfillment of the final prophecies in the Bible? The connection between Ethiopia and the Ark of the Covenant will certainly continue to be one of the most intriguing topics in discussions about the future and the fulfillment of end-time prophecies. Ethiopia, with its unique heritage and prophetic role, is not only a nation with a long religious tradition, but it could also be a bridge between peoples and a significant part of God's grand plan of redemption in the last days. The reappearance of the Ark of the Covenant could mark a great turning point in the history of human redemption, and Ethiopia will be an integral part of that story. Number 5. Ethiopia and the lineage of David, the key to salvation. In the Bible, the story of the relationship between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba is not only a history of diplomatic encounters or friendships between ancient kingdoms, but also a profound evocation of one of the greatest messianic prophecies and Ethiopia's role in God's ultimate plan of salvation. When the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon from Ethiopia, their relationship not only established a diplomatic link, but also opened a lineage legacy. Ethiopian tradition holds that they are direct descendants of King Solomon through his son Menelik-Iha, who is said to have brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia. This relationship, recorded in the Keber-Nagast Ethiopian mythology and history, shaped the religious and cultural foundations of the country. According to the Keber-Nagast, Menekwi founded a royal dynasty that lasted for centuries, with power being in the hands of the leaders. The rule was passed down from generation to generation, creating an eternal link between Ethiopia and the Davidic line. This made Ethiopia an important part of the prophecies about the coming of the Messiah. In the Bible, the Messiah was predicted to come from the line of King David. Prophetic books such as Isaiah and Micah confirm that the Messiah would come from this line, one who would bring salvation to the people of Israel and establish an everlasting dynasty. This not only points to the birth of Jesus, but also shows the connection between these prophecies and other peoples, including Ethiopia. If the Ethiopian royal family is indeed descended from Solomon, they would have a special part in the fulfillment of the messianic prophecies. Ethiopia, a nation already linked to the Davidic line, would have an important role in the final plan of salvation that God had long predicted. One of the interesting aspects of this story is the appearance of the Ark of the Covenant. According to Keber-Nagast, Menelik I brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia, and this event is not only a historical story, but also contains profound meanings in the context of end-time prophecies. The Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of the covenant between God and the people of Israel, is mentioned in Revelation 11:19 as an important sign of the end times. The reappearance of the Ark of the Covenant could indicate the fulfillment of the messianic prophecies and the implementation of God's plan of salvation and final judgment. If Ethiopia is indeed descended from the line of David, This would not only demonstrate the strong connection between Ethiopia and Israel, but also reflect an important part of the reappearance of the Messiah. The Old Testament prophets predicted that a king would come from the line of David, and the emergence of a king from Ethiopia could be a sign of the fulfillment of this prophecy. This would be an important event not only for Israel but for the whole world, because the Messiah would bring salvation and establish an everlasting dynasty. Ethiopia, one of the ancient nations, is also mentioned in the prophecies of the last days. The prophetic books of the Bible, such as Isaiah, all speak of the nations, including Ethiopia, bowing down to God and the Messiah in the last days. The association between Ethiopia and the line of David could indicate the nation's participation in the rebirth and resurrection of the nations in the kingdom of God. The story of Menelik I, the Ark of the Covenant, also carries within it a connection to the final events of history. According to the prophecy in the book of Ezekiel, in the end times there will be a great war, Armageddon, between the forces of good and evil. Ethiopia, with its role in the plan of salvation, may be involved in these great events, contributing to the battle between good and evil. However, like all biblical prophecies, this war will lead to God's intervention to defeat the forces of evil and establish an eternal reign in the kingdom of God. The Messianic prophecy is not simply the birth of someone from the line of David, but also the sign of the completion of the universal plan of salvation. The emergence of the Messiah from the line of David, through the union of Ethiopia and the line of Solomon, will be a major turning point in the restoration and salvation of all peoples, from Israel to distant nations. With all these elements, the story of Ethiopia and the lineage of David is not just a page in the history of an ancient kingdom, but also part of a larger plan that God has for humanity. In the end times, when the prophecies are fulfilled, Ethiopia will have an important role in the implementation of God's plan of salvation. Number 6. Ethiopia in the final battle, its role in prophecy. Ethiopia, commonly known as Cush in the Bible, is a nation mentioned in important prophecies about the final events of world history. According to the books of Isaiah and Ezekiel, Ethiopia plays an important role in the great battles that precede the return of Jesus. These prophecies not only describe the nation's involvement in global conflicts, but also reflect a spiritual battle between good and evil, between God and the forces of evil. In Isaiah 18, Ethiopia is described as a nation of great influence, which may be involved in important diplomatic dialogues in the end times. Isaiah 18:01-2 reads, "Woe to Cush, beyond the rivers of Cush, who sends messengers across the sea in boats made of reeds." These words imply that Ethiopia will play an important role in the end times. A powerful and influential nation, Ethiopia will bring offerings to God in the last days. According to many scholars, Isaiah 18 may indicate that Ethiopia will be part of a coalition of nations that will engage in great battles, possibly the Battle of Armageddon, where Christ will return. The name Cush may refer not only to Ethiopia, but also to the nations of East Africa, which will be involved in conflicts as the end times approach. In Ezekiel 38, Ethiopia is mentioned in another context. Here, Ethiopia is part of a coalition of nations that will come together to attack Israel in the last days. Ezekiel 38:5 reads, "With them shall be Ethiopia and Put, all of them holding shields and helmets." These words indicate that Ethiopia will participate in the great war against Israel. However, Ethiopia's involvement does not result in victory for them. In Ezekiel 38 verse 20:2-23, we see that although this war appears to be a fierce battle, the ultimate victory will belong to God. God will intervene and defeat the forces of evil, bringing salvation to Israel and carrying out his plan to restore his kingdom. The description of Ethiopia in the Bible is not limited to a war role, but also has a spiritual depth. In both Isaiah and Ezekiel, Ethiopia is seen as a power with far-reaching influence. Although engaged in great battles, Ethiopia is not simply a military force but also has a strategic role in international events, especially in diplomatic dialogue. In the end times, Ethiopia will be a nation involved in important dialogues, possibly bringing spiritual offerings or symbols to God. This is a point that shows that the country is not only involved in war, but also plays a role in restoring the relationship between man and God in the end times. Throughout history, Ethiopia has also had a special role in Christianity. The country is known for its deep religious traditions, and the protection of the Ark of the Covenant has become a powerful symbol of faith and steadfastness in the relationship with God. The legends of the protection of the Ark of the Covenant, which is traditionally believed to be kept in Ethiopia, may be a powerful image of the protection of the faith in the end times. The country is not only protecting a sacred object, but also protecting an important part of the covenant between God and the people of Israel. This protection itself may symbolize Ethiopia's perseverance and fidelity in protecting the faith during the most difficult times in its history. Ethiopia is no stranger to the Bible, and their role in the final battles is an integral part of God's plan. Despite their involvement in the wars, so much of what is happening now is due to their actions in Ethiopia and the war before it. Despite its great wars with other nations, Ethiopia has always been a nation that plays an important role in the restoration and re-establishment of the relationship between God and His people. They are not just a fighting nation, but a nation that stands firm in the faith in the end times when global conflicts seem inevitable. Ethiopia may not be the first nation that comes to mind when we talk about the final battles in Bible prophecy, but their role is significant. This nation is not only involved in military battles, but also plays a strategic role in forming alliances and deciding changes in international relations. They are part of the big picture that God has painted to bring humanity closer to the restoration and return of Jesus. Through the prophecies of the Bible, we can see that Ethiopia is not only a nation involved in the final battles, but also a nation that plays a role in protecting the faith and spiritual relationship with God. As the end times approach, Ethiopia will be one of the nations that will play a key role in carrying out God's plans, no matter how fierce the battle. Ethiopia's faithfulness and faith will be one of the decisive factors in the restoration and salvation of humanity. As we look at the end times of the Bible, understanding Ethiopia's role will help us see part of the grand plan that God has prepared. This nation will not only be involved in war, but will also be involved in a spiritual battle where God will be victorious and carry out His plan of salvation. Ethiopia in the final battle of prophecy is not just a nation in military conflict, but part of God's grand plan where faith, faithfulness, and protecting their relationship with God will lead them to ultimate victory. Number 7. Mount Sinai, the sacred mystery and the role of Ethiopia. In the quest to understand the sacred history of the Bible, an interesting and provocative hypothesis has emerged related to one of the most important places, Mount Sinai. According to tradition, Mount Sinai is where Moses received the Ten Commandments from God. But some scholars believe that this mountain is not located on the Sinai Peninsula, but may be located in the land of Ethiopia. Although this view is not widely accepted, it has attracted the attention of many biblical scholars, who believe that the mountains in Ethiopia have a significant similarity to the biblical description of Mount Sinai. According to some studies, the mountains in the Ethiopian highlands, especially in the Axum Plain and the highlands of Ethiopia, have many geographical features similar to what the Bible describes about Mount Sinai. Specifically, the Bible describes Mount Sinai as a majestic mountain with a high peak, desolate and rugged terrain, which fits with the mountainous terrain of Ethiopia. Mount Sinai is also believed to be located near a desert area, possibly the Sinai Desert, through which Moses led the Israelites. In Ethiopia, mountains such as Ras Dashen, the country's highest mountain, along with many others in the Axum region, may have been ideal locations for a sacred covenant. These areas are not only isolated but also have a sense of isolation and solitude, creating a quiet space ideal for Moses to meet God. Furthermore, Ethiopia has long been known for its rugged mountainous terrain and highland areas that could have been an ideal location for a sacred covenant. Considering the biblical descriptions, the fact that a mountain in Ethiopia resembles the traditional Mount Sinai, with its surrounding desert and isolation, would further support this theory. Ethiopia's Tigray region, home to many high and mysterious mountains, has been frequently associated with myth and religious history. Some believe that these mountains are the original Mount Sinai of biblical tradition. If this theory is correct, it would have profound implications for our understanding of biblical history. Mount Sinai was not only the site of the covenant between God and Israel, but also the starting point for subsequent covenants in the redemption of humanity. This change in geography could highlight Ethiopia's role in God's divine plan, broadening our view of the country, not only in its past, but also in its final prophecies. Mount Sinai, wherever it is an integral part of the story of God's great prophecies to the people of Israel. If we understand more deeply the connection between Ethiopia and these historical events, we will see more clearly the role of this nation in God's great plan for humanity, both in the present time and in the final moments of the world. Number 8. Ethiopia and its mysterious connection to the lost tribes of Israel. Ethiopia is not only famous for its long history and culture, but also has a special connection to the Bible, especially in the prophecies about the regathering of the lost tribes of Israel in the last days. The Ethiopian Jewish community, also known as Beta Israel, is an important bridge in this connection, with a mysterious story about the tribe of Dan, one of the 10 tribes lost after the attack of the Assyrian Empire in the 8th century BC. Beta Israel, descendants of the tribe of Dan? The Beta Israel community has a long history with the country of Ethiopia. It is believed that they are descendants of the tribe of Dan, one of the 10 tribes of Israel, lost after the conquest of Assyria in 722 BC. When the Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, these tribes were scattered and disappeared from history. However, the traditions and beliefs of Beta Israel have remained strong over the centuries, despite being completely isolated from other Jewish communities. The theory is that when the tribe of Dan was displaced, some of them may have migrated to distant lands, including Ethiopia. This would explain why Beta Israel had similar religious and cultural customs to other Jewish communities, including observing the laws of Moses, holding religious ceremonies, and preserving Israelite traditions. Prophecy in Ezekiel, gathering the scattered tribes. The prophecy in Ezekiel 37:19-24 is significant in its reference to the restoration and reunification of the tribes of Israel in the last days. Say to them, "Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I will take the stick of Judah and the stick of Israel, and I will make them into one stick in my hand. And they shall no longer be two nations, nor shall they be divided into two peoples." This is a prophecy of a day when God will restore and reunite the tribes of Israel, including the lost tribes. And Beta Israel, with its Ethiopian Jews, is said to be part of this process. The return of this community may itself be a sign of the fulfillment of the prophecy of the reestablishment of the nation of Israel. Operation Solomon, the return of Beta Israel. A significant event in the relationship between Ethiopia and the tribes of Israel was Operation Solomon in 1991. During this operation, more than 1,400 Ethiopian Jews were evacuated from Ethiopia to Israel. This was a secret and secure operation organized under the auspices of the Israeli government. Many believe that this event was a direct fulfillment of the prophecy in the book of Ezekiel about the gathering of the tribes of Israel. The return of Beta Israel was not only an important historical event, but also a divine sign signaling the fulfillment of the divine plan in the last days. For the Ethiopian Jewish community, this was an important step in returning to their homeland. The mysterious connection between Ethiopia and the lost tribes. Some scholars and researchers believe that the return of Beta Israel was not only ethnic, but also had a profound spiritual significance. The connection between Ethiopia and the tribes of Israel, especially the tribe of Dan, offers a new perspective on God's plan of redemption in the last days. Ethiopia, with its Beta Israel community, played a key role in the restoration and reunion of the tribes of Israel, and their return may be part of the fulfillment of prophecy. Ethiopia in God's plan of salvation. The connection between Ethiopia and the tribes of Israel is not simply a political or religious relationship. It also has a deep spiritual significance in the context of God's plan of redemption. Ethiopia has not only been a country that has preserved the Jewish faith for centuries, but also serves as a bridge between the lost tribes of Israel and the plan of restoration of Israel in the last days. With the return of Beta Israel and its bloodline connection to the tribe of Dan, Ethiopia may be one of the key prophetic signs of the restoration of Israel in the Bible. This also shows that Ethiopia will continue to play a vital role in the fulfillment of God's divine plans for Israel and other nations in the end times. When we look at the history and events surrounding Beta Israel, we not only witness a long journey of faith and resilience, but also see a powerful message from the Bible. God always keeps His promises and will bring His plan to completion in the last days. Number 9. Ethiopia, the real Zion in prophecy. Throughout history, Zion has always been associated with Jerusalem, the place prophesied to be where Jesus would return and establish his kingdom. However, there is a controversial and interesting view that Ethiopia, with its long history of faith and protection of the Ark of the Covenant, may be the real Zion of which the prophecies speak. Psalm 87:46. An important hint. Psalm 87:4-6 is an important passage in the Bible where Cush, the ancient name for Ethiopia, is mentioned. The verse reads, "I will record Rahab and Babylon among those who acknowledge me, Philistia and Tyre, along with Cush, and they will say, 'This one was born in Zion.'" What is remarkable here is that Cush is placed on the same level as great nations like Babylon, Philistia, and Tyre, peoples who knew God. Furthermore, the phrase, "this man was born in Zion," has led some to speculate that the biblical Zion could be not only Jerusalem but also Ethiopia. This is an interesting view, suggesting that Ethiopia could be the spiritual center of the kingdom of God in the last days. Kebra Nagast and the Ark of the Covenant. In addition to Psalm 87, an important source that supports this view is the Kebra Nagast, an ancient Ethiopian text. According to the legend in the Kebra Nagast, the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred symbol of God's presence, was moved from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. It was Menelik I, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, who brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia. In Ethiopian tradition, the Ark of the Covenant is guarded at the Temple of Mary of Zion in Aksum, where only a single priest can see it. If what Kebra Nagast says is accurate, and Ethiopia is indeed the guardian of the Ark of the Covenant, this would have huge implications in the context of end-time prophecies. Revelation 11:19 also refers to the reappearance of the Ark of the Covenant in the last days as part of God's plan of redemption. This would further strengthen the belief that Ethiopia could play an important role in the world's end-time events. Is Ethiopia the real Zion? If Ethiopia is indeed the Zion that the prophecies speak of, this would radically change how we understand the end-time events of the Bible. In biblical tradition, Zion has always been associated with Jerusalem, where Christ will return and establish his kingdom. But with the arguments from Psalm 87 and Kebra Nagast, some believe that Ethiopia, with its strong history of Christian faith and guardianship of the Ark of the Covenant, could be the spiritual heart of the world in the last days. This is a major shift in the understanding of the role of nations in God's redemptive plan. Impact of this view. If this view is correct, it would change the way we view prophetic geography and the role of nations in the end-time events of the world. The tradition of Zion and Jerusalem as the center of redemption would be overturned. Ethiopia, a nation with a long history of Christian faith and protection of the Ark of the Covenant, would become a powerful symbol in the spiritual battles of the last days. This would not only change the way we understand Jerusalem, but would also open up new discussions about the Lord's return and the establishment of his kingdom. A new perspective on end-time prophets. Ethiopia could become a major player in the fulfillment of end-time prophecies. If it is indeed Zion, it would require a major rethinking of biblical prophecy, the role of nations in end-time events, and how God will carry out his plan of redemption. It would also open up a new dialogue about the Lord's return and how he will build an eternal kingdom where all nations will come and worship him. So, with this new perspective, Ethiopia is not just a biblical nation, but could become the center of spiritual warfare in the end times. It is a radical shift in how we view prophetic geography and the role of nations in God's plan of redemption. We will have to wait and see what future events reveal about this truth. Ethiopia, with its rich and profound history, is not only a country located in the northeastern corner of Africa, but also a symbol in apocalyptic prophecies. The Ark and Zion are not only sacred symbols, but are also associated with signs of redemption and restoration in God's great plan. In prophecies, especially in the prophetic books of the Old Testament, Ethiopia is a model for the peoples who will have a share in the salvation and resurrection of Jerusalem. Together with the image of the Ark of the Covenant, where God dwells, Ethiopia appears as a representative of the chosen people and also a warning to the world about the spiritual restoration and glory of Zion in the last days. The prophecy of the resurrection of Zion in the Apocalypse is not only a symbol of hope for Israel, but also an invitation for all peoples, including Ethiopia, to turn to God in search of redemption. Ethiopia's participation in the restoration and glory of Zion is a living testimony to God's mercy and justice, that he will not abandon anyone, no matter the nation, as long as they turn to Him in humility and repentance. We are called to recognize that in the end-time prophecies, no one is left behind. Let us wait together for the return of the Lord and the reestablishment of His kingdom on earth. If you feel the call of God through these lessons, don't forget to follow and subscribe to our channel to continue discovering more divine messages in God's Word.